Hello everyone and welcome to the Fantasy Fellowship YouTube channel. My name is Jess and I am ecstatic to be joined today by Elisa Kova for this Q&A. Elise is the internationally best-selling author of currently 7 fantasy series, including Air Awakens, The Loom Saga, and A Trial of Sorcerers. Elise has self-published over 20 books since becoming a full-time author in 2016. In this interview, we're going to focus on the Married to Magic series prior to the UK-wide release of these books on the 19th of October. Married to Magic is a romantasy series of standalones set in the same world, with each book following a different relationship. I'll pass over to Elise to tell you a little bit more about them.
First off, thank you again for having me. Very excited. And hello, everyone who's watching. A little bit about Married to Magic. So as mentioned, it is a standalone. So I always hesitate calling it a series because I don't want people to think that they have to read the books in sequential order. So it's definitely you can read any of the 4 books that are currently out, or the 5th one, once that one is out, in any order that you want. Every book follows a young woman who is taken from the natural world, the human world, and is whisked away by some handsome magical man into the land of Midscape. So the first book is A Deal with the Elf King, following a young healer who is taken as the Elf King's bride. The second book is A Dance with the Fey Prince, her hand is sold in marriage unbeknowingly to a Fey Prince in hiding. The third book is A Duel with the Vampire Lord, which is enemies to lovers and kind of exactly what you think that book would be, but with some twists and turns along the way. And the fourth book is A Duet with the Siren Duke, which was inspired by The Little Mermaid, a little bit of Call of Cthulhu, and it's about a sailor who gets taken to the Siren realm as a sacrifice for an old god. And then the 5th book will be out August 1st of next year. It'll have a worldwide global release, and that'll be A Dawn with the Wolf Knight.
Thank you so much. Are you ready to start with the questions?
I'm ready. Let's go.
So we're going to start by looking at the books themselves. Each of the books, as you slightly mentioned, were inspired by different fairy tales and legends. How did these influence your stories?
I love being inspired by classic fairy tales or myths and legends because my goal when I was writing Married to Magic is I wanted to write books that you could curl up with after a hard day, and it just felt good to read, and you knew that there was going to be a happily ever after at the end, maybe some tension, some twists and turns along the way, a little bit of spice in there, but overall just a fun, easy book to read. And I think being inspired by fairy tales and myths and legends it's come so naturally in wanting to write a book like that, because those stories are so familiar to everyone. Like A Deal with the Elf King, I was inspired by Hades and Persephone. A Dance with the Fey Prince, I was inspired by Cinderella and the myth of Psyche and Eros. For A Duel with the Vampire Lord, I was inspired by Beauty and the Beast and actually a bit of Pride and Prejudice, which I know is not a myth or a fairy tale, but I think we are all pretty familiar with that story. And as I mentioned, A Duet with the Siren Duke was The Little Mermaid, and a little bit of Call of Cthulhu tied in with the myth of Orpheus and Eurydice. So they all kind of have these different vibes going on that I think helps make them feel familiar, but they're not intended to be literal retellings, which is always something I want to stress, because if someone goes into it thinking, oh, this is going to be the myth of Hades and Persephone, that's a very different book. It's meant to be like a loose inspiration.
No, I liked, obviously they're not completely like those stories that we know and love, but I liked picking up on the little aspects. I loved in the Siren Duke seeing the little Cthulhu influences. That I thought was such a fun inspiration to add in there. I'd love to know what research you did to build these different areas of Midscape.
I draw a lot from places that I've been fortunate enough to go, different locations in real life. It's never a one-for-one thing for me because, again, I want these locations to feel familiar to people, but I don't want them to be like, oh, that's intended to be, I don't know, 1400s Germany or something like that. There's no there's no one-for-one sort of correlation, but at the same time, there's definitely those inspirations of times that I've been in very mountainous regions or in very woodsy regions. One example is my sister lives out in California, and whenever I have an opportunity to go out there, we've gone hiking through these gorgeous redwood forests that are just dense and lush and feel primordial. And that was a big inspiration for A Deal with the Elf King and using redwoods in that. I also had for A Duel with the Vampire Lord, I studied under a blacksmith for a day and I forged my own dagger because the main character of that is a blacksmith. So I wanted to have that experience. For A Duet with the Siren Duke, I went sailing. So I try and get as much of those experiences as I can. And of course, a professional blacksmith, a professional sailor will probably read what I wrote and go, not so much, but as much as I can without dedicating years of time and practice that it takes to master those things. I want to get into my characters' heads as much as possible.
It's brilliant to get that feeling by doing the stuff yourself. I love that. How did you go about deciding on like the magic itself? So with the vampires, they have a very specific, I don't want to spoil or anything, but that's very specific to them. And then obviously with the Fae, they have this really interesting ritual magic, which is very different to the elves. And how did you come up with those?
I think that making magic systems is honestly one of my favorite things about writing fantasy. I love, I think Brandon Sanderson coined these terms, but I love hard magic. I love soft magic. I love everything in between. And I love kind of figuring out what I'm going to implement for a story. And of course, as I've kind of touched on already, there's no story that's made in a vacuum. So there are rituals in the real world that have been either cast as magical or intentionally intended to be magical, or just feel magical because they're so special in the way that we do them. And I think that, taking those inspirations as well as inspirations from other books and movies and video games and things that have come before and kind of playing with that mashup. But I definitely wanted, because these books are standalones and there's very little crossover that happens between them, and they all take place in a different region of Midscape at the time that these books are taking place, each of the sort of species, if you will, are quite sequestered from the other. There's not too much overlap between them. And so I wanted each area to feel distinct, with each people to feel distinct, and of course, their magic to feel as distinct as them as well.
Thank you. So one of the beloved themes in this series are the strong-willed, independent female characters that break cycles and traditions. Why was this something that you wanted to focus on?
Oh, that's a hard one. I mean, first off, thank you for saying, one, that the characters are beloved, and two, that you think they're strong-willed and independent, because that always makes me feel good, because that's what, I would want to do. I think that, oh gosh, this is such a hard question, because I feel like I'm going to struggle articulating what I intend, but here goes nothing. I think that romance as a genre has been so female dominated for years, because for a long time it was one of the few authors or few genres where female authors could really shine in. And I'm not saying by any measure that you can't have incredible female authors, and that we have had incredible female authors in these other genres. So not saying that at all, but I think that there is something to be said for a genre that has historically been very safe for women to write in and read in, and to celebrate female-led stories and female-led experiences, or queer experiences as well. And so I think that for me, when I was writing these books, it was really important to me that I wanted to explore all of these different journeys that can exist to finding love and finding a happily ever after. So for Luella in A Deal with the Elf King, her journey, she starts off a little bit naive, a little bit sheltered, because that's her backstory. And her story and her journey to love was really learning how to love herself and do things for herself, and that's okay. She doesn't just have to do everything for everyone else all the time. For Katria, her journey was a lot about, her family didn't model a very healthy example of love, and she had to overcome that. For Florian in A Duel with the Vampire Lord, that sort of Pride and Prejudice sort of thing of she saw the vampires as these monsters, and she had to overcome that and have that perception challenged. And in A Duet with the Siren Duke, it's a second chance love story of a character who is divorced and is having an opportunity to find love again, and what that healing journey means for her. And because of that, they all have very different happily ever afters too, where not to spoil anything, but they are happily ever after. So the couples get together at the end. Shocking. But like some of the characters have that sort of fairy tale, we're married and we're gonna have babies and everything is everything's good. Other characters are like, I want to get married, but I'm not ready yet. Some characters will be like, I don't know if I want kids. I haven't explored that. I have a character that is like, my happily ever after doesn't involve children, and that's okay too. And so I really tried to bring in as many of those journeys to love and as many of those happily ever afters as I can into this series, so that way it's sort of to celebrate that there's different paths to finding your one, to finding your happiness, and they're all valid and they're all wonderful at the end of the day.
So I that's one of my favorite aspects of the books, that even though obviously they are standalones, but the stories are so different but still happy and still all valid as forms of happiness and valid relationships. And that's something that I just thought was amazing about these books. Did you have any it's okay. Did you have any women that inspired any of these amazing female main characters?
Oh gosh. I similarly to building worlds, I don't have a one for one. Like I don't have, this particular character is intended to be this real life person. But I have had the good fortune of knowing a lot of incredible, strong women in my life, and women who have had so many diverse life paths that have, again, all found happiness. Like I have some women in my life who are the corporate, like, conquerors. They don't want kids and they are living their best dual income, no kids lifestyle out there. I have other female friends who are like, all I've wanted to be is a mom, and they're incredible moms and they're so fulfilled and so happy. And so I've been really fortunate that I have some incredible women to surround me and incredible people that surround me, and I can draw a lot from their experiences as I'm writing and try and celebrate them as much as I can.
That's amazing. How did you go about writing romances that are just so intense that, without spoiling anything, break the boundaries of convention?
This is a hard question because it's like sometimes you don't always know why it works. Like there are definitely times as a writer where you'll write something and it'll land a certain way and you're really glad it does and it was your intention, but you're like, I don't know how I did that. Like it's kind of like the first time, I don't know, I would imagine like the first time you land like a trick on a skateboard. I can't skateboard at all, so I don't know why I'm trying to use this metaphor. But like the first time you land a trick and you're like, I did it, but I'm not 100% sure how my body knew to move that way, and I don't know if I can do it again. I think it goes back to, though, that wanting to be real as much as possible, even though these are fantasy books set in fantasy worlds, and yes, there are things that will come together unnaturally perfectly or unnaturally easily, and that's part of the happily ever after. But I think that by keeping it grounded in reality as much as I can and experiences that I've either had or I've seen people had, it makes it feel real. And so I would hope that the reader is along for the ride because of it.
Thank you. So even though the books in this series can be read separately and in any order, and like you said, it's not really a series, but a set of standalones, There are little nuggets to uncover about characters in the other area of Midscape, and after you've read the books, you can read the bonus scenes, which add a little more to that. Was it your intention to interconnect them from the beginning?
Yes, very much so. I definitely had the world in mind, although I will be honest, I wasn't sure if I was going to write more because I wrote A Deal with the Elf King at the start of the pandemic, and I was tired, I was scared, I was shut in, and I just wanted to write a book that made me happy and made me feel good. And that was sort of how that was born. And I had never written a standalone before. I had never tried, that style of heavy romance first, romantasy first story. I have other series like Air Awakens where it is romance heavy, but it's definitely plot heavy as well and whatnot. And so I was like, all right, I still want to have plot, but the romance is the driver of the story. And I didn't know how it would perform. And so I sort of had in the back of my mind of like, I have these other areas. I'd love to write more books. I had a lot of fun writing this, but as an author and a full-time author, as you mentioned, this is how I pay my bills. And to be very kind of not artsy, but truthful, sometimes as authors, we have to make hard decisions between our muse and our wallets. And if a book doesn't sell well, there's so much time and money that gets invested into producing a book that you have to stop and go, is it worth it to keep writing these books? So while I definitely had ideas for the other books in Midscape, and I hoped that I was going to write them, I wasn't sure when the first book came out if they would see the light of day, but I'm very glad they have.
Thank you. How do you approach continuity with these little bonus bits that we can pick up on?
Ooh, it's been hard because again, there are elements of, because I'm writing one of these books every year and releasing one a year, there are elements of, oh man, if I could go back in time and change that or like adjust that fact or adjust that date, I would. But I think that that's also one of the fun challenges to overcome as an author is there's a little bit of that puzzle when you write either these interconnected worlds or you're writing an actual series that follows a chronology. Anytime you're dealing with a timeline, basically. But I think that it is so much fun to try and puzzle all those things together and see how you can make it work, even if it's after the fact. So while I had an idea for some things, other things I definitely had to be like, okay, I said this in this book and this in this book. Where do they meet that both things can be true, but also it works for this story?
What could the little bits we get to pick up on mean for later books in the series?
So I do have an idea for a potential overlapping novel of all of them. It would definitely be, that would be the one book that I would say, even if it is a standalone, you kind of need to read the other ones to understand what's going on. It would be something kind of more fluffy, fun, maybe a little bit shorter than, especially shorter than like A Duel with the Vampire Lord or A Duet with the Siren Duke. But I do have ideas of sort of how these things might overlap in the future. And even if they don't, I think that one of my beliefs as an author is that when I publish a book, in many ways, it's no longer mine anymore. It's as much yours, it's as much my readers as it is mine. And I think that places where I don't fill in the blanks, sometimes I'll be honest, sometimes it's a flaw of my writing and I should improve on it and I should say something when I didn't. But a lot of times it's intentional in that I want to invite my readers to make their own theories, to connect the dots, to think about what's happening next in the future and in the past. And so some of those bonuses and some of those little Easter eggs in all of the different books are really kind of that, of like clues of this is what's going on in the bigger picture, but maybe there won't be solid answers given at any point. But I invite you to think about those things and spend time in this world for just a little bit longer.
I found that those little bits that you can find are really nice for a reread. when you have read all of them and get to go back and start again, and then you find little bits that connect to the other books. That's really fun, and it's
And
exciting to
that's,
hear about. Oh, go ahead.
yeah. No, I was just going to say that's one of my favorite things to do as a writer. Like my Air Awakens and Vortex Chronicles series are sort of my two big ones that I use as an example for this. But I love writing books that give you a different experience the second time you read them, because you see things that you missed the first time.
Thank you. It's really exciting for there to potentially be an interconnecting book, even if it doesn't happen. Like, the concept is very exciting. We're going to move on to your writing now. What does your writing process look like?
Chaos. Honestly, so my writing process is fairly normal for a lot of authors. I go through all the big stages of conceptualization, drafting, developmental edits or content edits, line editing, and proofreading or copy edits, you know, all of that kind of. There's a lot of different ways to say the same thing I've discovered in publishing, but pretty much I go through all the major editorial phases. Now, what each one of those looks like really depends on the book. I've had books, A Deal with the Elf King is a perfect example of, it is just, it flows. It flows from me. It's easy to write. I can sit down and write my 1,500 to 2,000 words a day and then call it a day, and it drafts up and I finish the book and I look at it and go, yeah, I feel good about that. Like, I nailed that. And then I have other books where, like A Duel with the Vampire Lord, where I rewrote the first 30,000 words of that book, I kid you not, like 6 times. And it really is just, it depends on the book, on what the writing process looks like and where, if anywhere, I hit those snags. Sometimes it's in the drafting, sometimes it's in the editing. And I think all that to say, if you are a writer, you know, there are a lot of stages. So if you don't feel good about your first draft, that is perfectly normal. First drafts are meant to be messy and ugly and bleh. And so trust the process, because there are later stages.
Thank you. So one thing I found really interesting about you, many authors avoid reviews of their books, but you seem to value reading them. Why do you do this, and what impact does reading reviews have on your books?
So I firmly believe that reviews are for reviewers and other readers. And if I step into that space, I am a silent, like, fly on the wall observer. Go in, go out. It is not my place to comment. It is not my place to tell people how they should feel or not about my books, because everyone interacts with the book differently. That being said, I always want to be improving my writing. And I want to be improving my writing not just as a general craft perspective, but also improving my writing for my readers. And so usually I will read reviews for the first 2 to 4 weeks after a book is out. After 2 to 4 weeks, I don't really do it as much, unless I'm, tagged in one that's just like 5 stars, I loved it. And then, who doesn't like that little bump in the day of serotonin? But I don't seek them out after that point. But the reason why I read reviews in that first kind of month or so is I really want to see what those initial readers, who are probably some of my most loyal readers, because they're buying the book on the day one, they're reading the book, they're passionate enough to leave a review. What are those reviewers saying? What worked in that book, and how can I do more of that in the future? And what didn't work in that book, and how can I do less of that in the future and improve my writing in that way? I think one really good example of it too was with A Duet with the Siren Duke. When that book was first published, I noticed in a lot of reviews some misconceptions about the circumstances of the ending. And it wasn't just some reviewers being like, oh, I didn't like this or I didn't like that, and that was just their opinion, which is all well and good and fine. But truly what they didn't like was not accurate to my intention and the facts of what the world was that I was building. And so that to me said, oh, snap, I should go back in and just all it took was adjusting 2 or 3 lines of dialogue. And the fortunate thing about being an independent author is that I could go in and do that. But all it took was just that little tweak, and it helped people understand the ending better. Now, if they still don't like the ending, that's fine. I mean, I wish they did, but that's fine. But I think things like that are those opportunities that I have to really try as much as possible to, one, make sure my stories are landing in the way that I want them to, and learn from that, and also just learn what my readers want from me and try to give them more of that.
I finished the Siren Duke a couple of days ago, and I had a read of the changes in the ending. And while I came to the same conclusion that you intended, it's really interesting to see how just a few tweaks can massively change how something reads. So I think that was a really great idea for viewers, for readers, to make sure they get that, what you intended.
Yeah, and I mean, I'll be honest, unfortunately, those little tweaks didn't make it into the first printing that's going to be in those global editions. So for anyone watching, they were changed and they'll be in subsequent editions. But I think that it's if I have that opportunity to improve someone's reading experience, I want to take it. Why wouldn't I? To me, that's the same as fixing a typo.
Thank you. So writing, you've written so many books, and it looks like you get a few out a year, which is insane. Writing all of those books sounds like a lot of hard work over a really long period. What do you like to read when you get the time?
I unfortunately, it is my author confession of shame that I unfortunately do not have as much time to read as I wish I did. Though I feel like we all say that, like even if we had 8 hours in the day, we would probably still be going, I don't have as much time as I want to read. I read if I'm writing. I tend to read a lot of nonfiction because I want to keep the world that I'm writing straight in my head. So I'll read like popular science books, I'll read memoirs, I'll read psychology or history books, just anything that catches my eye in the moment. And of course, all of that can help inform my writing. Knowing about history can help me build worlds, knowing about psychology can help me build characters. So I think that, it does help my writing, but it's very boring books that most readers, I feel like, are not interested in. Of course, writing craft books as well. When I am in more of my editorial phases, less in the actual I'm actively drafting a book, I will read exactly what I like to write, which is epic fantasy romance. I will get as many books in when I'm between books as I possibly can.
Can you recommend any books to our community?
I would say the first one that comes to mind is Danielle Jensen. Full disclaimer, she's a personal friend. I might be biased, but I'm not biased in recommending her books. They're fabulous. If you have read my books and you kind of want something that's, I feel like, in the same vein, but also still very different, her Bridge Kingdom series is incredible. I think there's 4 books out now in that, or the 4th is just about to come. I think it's just about to come out in ebook and paperback, and it's out in audio. But I highly recommend that. And I had an opportunity to read her next big release, which is A Fate Inked in Blood, which will be out, I think it's February of next year. And of course I got an early copy. So I was like, I'm going to read it. And it was fabulous. So much fun. So many like laugh out loud moments, as well as just all the romantic tension you could want.
Thank you. I'm personally really excited for that. It just sounds amazing.
It's so good. It truly is so good. It's nonstop fun from page 1.
So you've self-published so many books, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you publish all of your books. What does this process look like for you?
I would imagine very similar to what a publisher's process looks like, with the exception of 1, I don't have print runs. My books are print on demand. And 2, I do it all for the most part myself, whereas publishers will have teams and whatnot. So I take the book through that editorial process that I mentioned earlier, because I'm a firm believer of you can have the best covers and the best marketing, but if the book inside is not good, then you're starting from way far behind. So I'll take the book through that process. I work with some incredible illustrators to get the covers that I work with. I've been so lucky that so many illustrators have said, yes, I'll work with you. And that's very much a collaboration, because I pick an illustrator because I like their artistic vision and style. And I don't want to stifle that. I don't want to just go in and be like, this is exactly what you have to do. A duet with the Siren Duke was a really perfect example of that. That cover is not what I imagined at all. And I love it. I love that cover. But I feel like if I had gone in and had kind of strong-armed that illustrator, I would not have ended up with something that beautiful. And so get the cover done. I work with some promotional companies and whatnot to try and help spread the word, format the book, and then listing it for pre-order or purchase through places like Amazon, Ingram Spark, those types of places that are all print on demand and friendly to indie authors, and getting them out that way. That's the super simplified, like we could talk for 3 hours and not have enough time to cover everything. So if you have a follow-up question, please don't hesitate to ask, but that's kind of the super simple overview.
I love if you can get the hardbacks for people that are watching, they've got really beautiful designs under the covers. What made you want to do that, and how do you go about getting such a lovely design as an indie author?
So I have always loved underjacket designs on hardcovers. I was one of those kids that when I got a hardcover, and hardcover was my preference when I was younger, I was one of those kids that the first thing I would do is I would take off the dust jacket and I would look to see what's under the hardcover. And I always felt like it was a super missed opportunity when it was just like cloth with a basic title stamped in Times New Roman on the spine. And, you know, I'm sure that is some people's aesthetic, which is great, like to each their own. But for me, it just seemed like it was a missing opportunity to do so much more with that, because it's almost like a second cover. You have that second opportunity to capture readers' imaginations. When I first started publishing, the only thing that was available in hardcover for print on demand independent authors was a simple cloth basic text on the spine. And I did that because that was the only thing that I could offer. But as independent or self-publishing has evolved and the companies have evolved with it, that was something that I want to say it was back in like 2012 or not 12, 2020 or so that the printers were able to do that, which is basically like a case design with a jacket over it. So I do those through Ingram Spark. And they are fortunate enough to that's a service they just offer to indies. There's nothing special. I don't have any like secret ins or anything like that. It's just Ingram Spark, their jacketed case laminate, and that's it. And then beyond that, it's just designing the underjacket design just as you would a cover.
Thank you. So why did you choose to self-publish your books rather than going down the traditional publishing route?
So I tried to go the traditional route originally. As a lot of authors will say, you know, your publishing journey is kind of like it's not a straight line. I tried to go down the traditional publishing route originally. I was never opposed to self-publishing. I have a background in business. I liked the idea of self-publishing and kind of all the fun stuff that comes with it. There's a lot of cons as well, but I knew that, or I learned that when you self-publish a book, unless the book hits a certain level of success, publishers will not touch it, because publishers really want new material that they can bring to the market. And that has changed over the years. There's been so much change in publishing. But when I started querying, it was 2013, 2014. So things were very different back then. And which really is wild to say because it really wasn't that long ago, but definitely a lot of changes. And so I queried agents because I was like, I want to see what the traditional publishing path could offer. Unfortunately, none of the agents agreed to represent me. I queried like 111 over a year. And that was the point that I said, all right, I feel like I've queried literally everyone in publishing. No one wants my book, which it happens. Publishing is a game of rejections nonstop. And so I went ahead and I published Air Awakens. That was my debut in August of 2015. I don't know why I can't think of dates right now. August of 2015. And I went on from there. My sophomore series, The Loom Saga, originally was published under a small press, so that had a traditional deal. The rights subsequently reverted back to me. And then I independently published that. And it really hasn't been until the last year that I've had an opportunity to kind of go back into that hybrid space again with the Married to Magic launch that's coming from Orion, those global beautiful paperback editions, as well as in 2025, I have my next big series in Big New World Arcana Academy that's coming from Del Rey in the US and Hotterscape in the UK. And so I'm really excited to kind of live in that hybrid space again for a while, because I think that in publishing, sometimes people with really good intentions can say, this is the right path, or this is the path you should take. And I think it comes from a place of them saying, really, this is how I found success. And again, it comes from that good place of they want to pass that on. But every author is different and every book is different. And I love seeing the change in the space to allow kind of this more hybrid model for authors.
Thank you. So obviously you've mentioned a little bit about the UK release. What could the new UK-wide release mean for UK-based fans of these books?
The biggest things that the UK release will mean are that the books are going to be more widely available. And I don't just mean they're going to be easier to get on retailers online, which they will be, but they'll also be in bookstores. You'll be able to, if you don't see them in a bookstore, they'll be super easy to go to like your book buyer at Waterstones and say, hey, I want this book, and they'll order it in, no problem. Whereas before, when I was print on demand as an independent, that's very hard to do. And most bookstores, understandably, this is not the fault of the bookstore, couldn't do it. And there were issues keeping the books even in stock, even online. So that problem will go away. The books will also be much cheaper. I think I've seen the paperback. I don't know if this is a pre-order price. Please don't quote, like, I'm sorry if this is wrong, but I think I've seen the paperback price at like £9.99. I want to say, at least at last look on Amazon.
That seems pretty traditional for kind of indie and paperback. So
yeah. And for me, offering my books, I want to say the physical paperbacks of my books from me were like 12 or no, I think they were like 13 or 14 pounds, or maybe even a little bit more. So they're going to be cheaper. They're going to be more widely accessible. And then there's the opportunity of, you know, further investment from the publisher of things like potential UK tour or special hardcover editions, or, you know, any of those sort of special things. But a lot of that will depend, again, being very direct, on how the book does. So the best thing that I can say is, you know, if you haven't read the books and you want to give them a chance, please support your local bookstores, go in, buy them. And if you have read the books, please spread the word to your friends and family who might be interested, who might have been like, oh, I want to read it, but it's a little pricey and I have to wait like 4 weeks to get it from Amazon. Like, tell them you don't have to wait 4 weeks anymore. They will be out on October 19th and readily available everywhere.
It's really exciting. So that's all of the questions I have for you today. Thank you so much for joining us, Elise. For those watching, make sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. And if you've made it to the end of the video, let us know if you've read any of Elisa Kova's books, not just the Married to Magic series, and let us know which was your favorites. Bye, everyone.
Thank you so much for having me. Bye.